let's go back to the beginning. What about when people really did this back in the day? Where did this come from? So the first hydroponic gardens in the world could be described as early as 600 BC, and at least in written literature. My opinion, if we think about chinampas, then it's thousands of years before that, and we don't even know. It may be tens of thousands of years. So the Hanging Gardens of Babylon are believed to be the first successful attempts to grow plants hydroponically. That's what's from a hydroponic website. Do we really believe that, of course, we know they had Archimedes' screw, and they could bring water up distances. That's cool. So we know that. But do we think that they actually ran it down with no soil? This is what they're promoting, that the Hanging Gardens of Babylon had no soil. Or are they saying that it did have soil? I mean, I see trees and things growing. That looks to me that must have soil. So that must be permaponics, not hydroponics, but they're saying it's hydroponics. So is hydroponics permaponics with soil? But when you take away the soil, it creates all the problems. When you put the soil back, like they did, right? Trees and coconuts and things. You're not going to grow coconut tree without soil, right? How did you anchor it? And they didn't have synthetic anchoring systems at that time, perlite and vermiculite and rock wool. So how did they anchor it? Well, sure, they had soil. They were just using the screw to bring it up there. And okay, let's be clear, they had slaves. So the slave poured the water and watered the plants each day, right? And the water ran down. Okay. The floating gardens of the Aztecs in the 11th century. So the Aztecs of Central America practiced hydroponic growing methods out of necessity. In their particular region, they had too many people living and they didn't have enough land. So they started to take in Lake Chicanampa and take it in to create this growing system, which became highly productive. And they figured out, wow, this works way better than ever having to carry water to the property. What we do is we bring the property into the water, okay? So what they did, they went to the edge of a lake and they dug a finger into the edge of the lake, right? A canal, if you will. That allowed the water from the lake to go in and then underwater the bed, which we say is a wicking bed. The water wicked up. So now they don't have to water the beds. This is a really interesting thing. They use capillary action or gravity, gravitational forces with electrical magnetism to bring the water up instead of us doing the physical labor of using wicker baskets, for instance. So that's what really happened there. Their beds were up to 200 feet long. Yeah, in some instances, up to 10 meters wide. They grew everything that they needed to eat on those beds, and that was what supported civilization. So I'd even bring this back to the first thing I like to say in our courses on permaculture. We can't really have a permanent culture, guys. We're not going to have a permanent culture if we don't develop a permanent agricultural systems. And you could describe that most of the problems we have with our current agricultural systems, right, are creating our cultural problems. So poor agricultural systems, disconnections from our food, no work ethic, no interactions, creates cultural problems. So if we can create more interaction with our food, right, we could create a better culture. So these permanent, i.e. agricultural systems, created what we see historical cultures. So if we see the Aztecs and they built pyramids and art and all this cool things we see back in the day, right? How did they do all that? They had free time. The free time was afforded because they had stabilized agricultural systems. They didn't have chemicals. They didn't have tractors, but they grew lots of food. Lots of food meant lots of free time. Now, we utilize all this energy, tractors and things, but where's our free time? Our free time's on our phone? Is that what we do? And this is a question that maybe we should have a more interaction. So where did hydroponics kind of take off from? So that's the history, but it kind of got lost. But where did it start to take back off? When did this come together? Well, hydroponics was used in World War II to feed the troops. So in the 1940s, we start to see the first usage of what we might call commercial hydroponics. So during the late 1940s, a practical hydroponic method was developed by Robert B. and Alice P. Withrow. The system flooded, then drained a container holding gravel and the plant roots. During World War II, the shipping of fresh vegetables overseas was difficult. In 1945, the U.S. Air Force built one of the first large hydroponic farms on the Ascension Islands of the South Atlantic, followed by farms on islands in the Pacific. These hydroponic farms provided vegetables for U.S. troops. So after Pearl Harbor and all that good stuff, we have to go to invade to Japan, and you have to island hop, and you have to bring food. So you take over one island, install a food production capacity, to fight the next island, all the way over. So this is one of the major issues. So you could say that hydroponics are the ability to go to a place, very difficult conditions. Some of these only could be described as atolls, islands with very little water capacity. Maybe when you arrive, there's no well, there's no running water. But yet, with very little water, we could get food grown and fresh vegetables to troops they could fight. So maybe not good that the military develops technologies, but sometimes the technology, if it's allowing people, especially poorer people or people in very difficult places, to be able to grow food nutritiously, that's not a bad outcome. So new technology, though, brings this to more of the mainstream. How are we having a class about this stuff, right? Because, well, in the 1970s and the 1980s, it became accessible for what we might say small growers or small commercial growers to actually grow these types of plants economically to sell to the market. Well, how did that work? Well, commercial hydroponics in the US were held back until hydroponic systems were economically and easy to operate with the advent of high-tech plastics or PVC piping. So now that we could get a PVC pipe, because before that, they were using basically soldering copper pipes together or using very difficult and not accessible and very expensive. So most people can't do that type of work, nor could they afford to use that. And they didn't even have plastic to make a tank or a box or nothing. So everything's made from steel and or copper or stainless steels. And so that's just super, super expensive. And if you're fighting a war, that's fine. But in a normalized state, I can't afford that. But today, I can go to the market and I can buy a plastic container. I can buy PVC pipes. I can control water much easier at a very economic price. But hydroponics now, or what are people doing? So we can even look to the military again. So currently the US has hydroponic farms that cover as many as 60 acres and produce large quantity of produce. So we see a lot of the innovations of hydroponics or technologies coming again from the military. They spend a lot of money, research, and then people leave the military as they do, come into the commercial sector, and they say, hey, let's use this. So even timers and all these cool things that we now can take for advantage and say, it's only $5. Yeah, but who invented that? How did they invent that thing? So the US Navy is growing fresh vegetables on submarines and highly specialized recirculating hydroponic systems to help supply fresh vegetables for the crews. Well, what does that mean? Highly specialized recirculating. When you go to the bathroom, it comes back out vegetables. You eat the vegetables, you go to the bathroom. That's where the water comes from and the nutrients. So they're recirculating. So they have highly specialized septic tanks, if you will, to process the wastewater back into what you could describe as new water. New water can grow vegetables and then you eat them. And the future of hydroponics, well, we could look to space. If we need or desire to go to Mars, for instance, we're going to need to grow food to get there. So currently plans are being drawn for using hydroponics on space stations and on the surface of other celestial bodies. Hydroponics will be used in areas such as deserts and mountains where it's difficult to grow plants using traditional methods. So this is again where we start to say technology helps us to grow food for ourselves in places that are not accessible to us. You could look at an Earthship in that way. So an Earthship, the design of an Earthship will collect its own energy through sun, collect its own water through water harvesting systems, processes its own waste through inside septic tank systems. And it's really interesting. I've never been able to find anyone that would say this or describes it, but I would find it very difficult to describe that inside of an Earthship is not permaponics. Meaning that they're taking the wastewater and processing it with septic tanks, typically, and taking that wastewater and growing food. And that food, for sure, because I can see the beds, is in soil. So not to say that all people do that. Some do, some don't. But if a person is taking inside of his, is that permaponics? An indoor growing system utilizing soil? So it's not for me to say that Raktamachat made up permaponics. I think permaponics is there. It's just a description of this type of system utilizing soil.